Growing up in the mid-2000s, I can remember a lot of people debating whether or not video games could or should be considered art. And I remember thinking that was a very strange debate to have. Of course they're art. Art, as defined by Wikipedia, is something that stimulates an individual's thoughts, emotions, beliefs, or ideas through the senses. And I think anyone who spent longer than 10 minutes with a video game can agree they are capable of doing all of that and even more. A good game can entertain a person, allowing them to put aside whatever they might be dealing with and escape their reality for a little while. A great game can inspire a lifelong love of the medium and possibly even expand their reality in new ways they might not have explored prior to gaming. But there is another kind of video game, one that every gamer has. That game that was their first major obsession. The first game they ever poured over 100 hours into. The first game that they ever truly bought 100% into the world and its setting and invested themselves in. For some, this game might be a role-playing game, whose characters and settings were so otherworldly and fantastical that they couldn't help but give themselves over to it. For others, this might have been a Soldier or Call of Duty style game, whose story or historical context allowed them to better understand what someone in such a situation would have experienced. Or maybe it's a sports game, whose by-the-minute gameplay and competitive nature hooked the player and sucked them into the game as if they were out on the field calling the shots. For me, Final Fantasy VIII was this game. I can remember being a child and seeing it in the store, being amazed that this game needed 4 whole discs to fit its story onto. Remember, this was back during the PlayStation 1 era. Prior to this, I'd only ever played video games on an old Sega Genesis and then later on an N64. And while those consoles certainly had games that amazed me, Ocarina of Time, Star Wars Rogue Squadron, Conker's Bad Fur Day, no game grabbed me quite like Final Fantasy VIII did. Heck, at the risk of dating myself, it was the first game I ever bought a strategy guide for, just so I could find every last secret and detail. I might actually still have it somewhere in one of my closets now that I think about it. Upon reflection, no doubt part of that reverie was the fact that up until that point, I'd never played a JRPG before. It had never occurred to my 10-year-old brain that other countries made video games too. I remember loading up the game and being amazed by its graphics. That opening cutscene was more intense than just about anything I'd ever experienced before while playing a video game, let alone just watching a cutscene. The music, the movement, the characters, it was more like watching a movie than anything else. While the game and its graphics might look rather quaint and dated by today's standards, back then it was enough to blow my tiny little mind. As was the complexity of the game itself. Up until this point, I'd only ever experienced the real-time and moderately complex combat of the Legend of Zelda games, or else the occasional first-person shooter or combat racing game. To go from that to the combat system of Final Fantasy VIII was going from the shallow end of the pool to the salty waters of a vast ocean. Not only that, but the story, the characters, the setting, and the overarching narrative, as well as the level of background lore and detail in this game, were far beyond anything I had ever seen before. This game has left a subconscious impression on me that I cannot fully put into words. From little musical notes that tickle the nostalgia centers of my brain whenever I hear them, to entire levels that I remember playing as a kid, to the visuals that are seared into my brain. The impression this game has left on me cannot be understated. Even 20 years later, I can still remember the sights and the sounds of this game without needing to close my eyes. So with all that in mind, I'd like to explore the first half of this game with you all now, and then the second half in a later video. I'd like to show you the good and the bad, and explain to you why this game has left such an impression on me even 20 years later. There's going to be a lot of names in this video, names of characters, places, monsters, and other things, and I'm going to do my best to pronounce them all properly, but please know that if I do mispronounce something, it is by no means a sign of disrespect. Please also keep in mind that I am not an expert on any of the subjects covered in this video, and if you have opinions that are different than mine, that is okay. As I mentioned, the very first thing that grabbed me about this game when I first loaded it up is its opening cutscene, featuring 2 as of yet unknown characters battling atop a mountainside cliff. I remember the first time I saw this, being in awe of their movements. They were so fast, but more than that, they seemed real. A far contrast from the Legend of Zelda combat I was so used to up until that point. Thanks to the PS1's hardware, the game was able to perfectly articulate to me the anger, rage, smugness, and superiority of these characters as they fought. I remember being particularly surprised and shocked by the blonde-haired man actually managing to make the other man bleed, as up until that point, I'd never really seen blood in a video game before. Sure, I'd played games like GoldenEye that had little pops of it when the players were shot, and yes, Conker's Bad Fur Day has it in it too. But the blood in those games was always kind of abstract to me. It didn't look real, and so it wasn't real. It was just the effect that happened when I did a specific action. So I was rather startled when the blood not only appeared, but was so graphic at the time. And I was shocked again when the first man retaliated, slashing the blonde-haired man's face in the same manner. All of this, combined with an absolutely wonderful background score, along with other visuals in the sequence, a field of flowers, a mysterious girl, a strange woman, and questions asking me why and where are you. All of these got 10-year-old me pretty excited for this game in a way that I had never been before, and to this day still gets my heart pumping a little faster when I see it and think about it. We start the game off in a hospital bed, being scolded by a doctor for taking our training a little too seriously, and then being asked if we remember our name. Of course, the game allows you to name yourself whatever you want, but canonically the character's name is Squall Leonhardt, though the game shortens it to just Squall for most of its runtime, which I'll admit is an odd name for a game character. I'm sure the Japanese name sounds cooler and maybe isn't as odd, but I can remember 10-year-old me being very confused. What kind of name was Squall? Fun fact, the same character would show up later in the Kingdom Hearts series, and there he's referred to as Leon, which to me is a much better name. After confirming our name is indeed Squall, we're told to wait while the doctor calls our instructor Quizzits to have us discharged. While we lay in the bed, a mysterious woman visits us from behind the observation glass. She says a few cryptic things, but then leaves before we can ask who she is or why she's there. A short while later, Quizzits arrives, and we are again given a delightfully dated but still beautiful cutscene. I will say the lack of voice acting in these cutscenes is a bit odd, making the scenes feel like they're unfinished, but I think that's just today's modern standards creeping into a game that at the time could only dream of what modern tools we have now. Remember, this game was housed on 4 separate CDs, not DVDs, so they only had 700 megabytes or so of space to work with, and voice acting would have taken up a lot of space. Once discharged, we're escorted from the infirmary and brought to class where the teacher announces some lore-building information before dismissing everyone to go prepare for the upcoming test, before asking us if we've already completed one of the prerequisites. We have not, and so she tells us to meet her downstairs at the front of the garden. In classic anime fashion, as we're making our way towards the elevator, a female student who's late for class runs headfirst into us, knocking her to the ground and making us stagger backwards. Small tangent, but it's so funny to me to see all these older classic anime cliches and tropes being played out with 100% sincerity. Nowadays, we laugh when animes do this kind of thing, or maybe roll our eyes, but there was a time when these events and character types were an ingrained part of anime's DNA, and I find that so interesting to see here in this game. After dusting herself off, the girl introduces herself as Selphie and tells us that she's new to the garden. Being the kind of upstanding anime protagonist that he is, Squall offers to show Selphie around. And after making a quick stop to get some starting triple triad cards, both Squall and Selphie head for the first floor, where Squall shows the new girl how to use the map of the garden to find her way around, but also how fast travel works within the garden. With that, Selphie thanks us and vanishes off into the garden, never to be seen again, while we make our way to the front and meet Quizzits, who gives us a few tutorials before following us as we make our way to the nearby fire caverns. There, we pick a time limit and are then given that long to run through the caverns to the center, where we do battle with a giant boss monster / guardian force named Ifrits. Small tangent here, Quizzit said that students are required to beat this area before they can attempt the seed test. So does that mean that all seeds have an Ifrits as one of their guardian forces? Or does it mean that fire guardian forces regularly spawn here and therefore can be farmed? Beating Ifrits isn't hard, and he even has a fun little line of recognition if you pull out one of the 2 guardian forces that you already have junctioned to use against him. Which makes me wonder if the guardian forces all know each other? I don't think other guardian forces have similar interactions now that I think about it. In the end, we whoop his ass and make him our new guardian force, and then rush back to the entrance where Quizzits congratulates us before saying we should go back to the garden. In reality, I spend some time grinding out magic and experience for a bit before returning, but when I do, she tells me to go rest and get ready for the upcoming test. Combat in Final Fantasy VIII is a hybrid of real-time and turn-based systems. Each character in battle has a momentum bar, which refills in real time. When the bar is fully refilled, the player or monster attacks. While the bar is filling, players have a chance to issue commands that the character will then take when it's their turn. Although certain spells and abilities can be used by both the player and enemies to slow down, speed up, or pause the opposing side's momentum bars. And it's here that another aspect of nostalgia hits me: the combat theme music, the sound effects, the magic abilities, and the various sounds the monsters make. Each one of them triggers me in some small way, calling forth some hazy, half-remembered summer night where 10-year-old me had no idea what he was supposed to be doing in this game, but knew that if I kept wandering around this area, monsters kept showing up to attack me, I kept winning, and I kept leveling up. While modern game presentation may have become more refined and sleeker, I can't help but love this classic RPG menu system: attack, magic, item, and run. It has such a classic feel to it, and I can't help but be reminded of old school Pokemon on the Game Boy Color. Although it is important to note that in Final Fantasy VIII, the combat menu options can be swapped out for a few other abilities, so not all characters will have the same options, which I think is pretty innovative, and honestly, I can't think of many other games that do this. Though I suppose with most modern UIs and button combos, players aren't limited to just these 4 options anymore. The actual combat itself is stylish looking, being fully animated and completed with some fairly good sound effects. The slash of Squall's blade, the snap of Quizzet's whip, the meaty whack of Zell's punches, and the report of Irvine's gun, they all sound pretty good and give a good feel for what's happening in the moment-to-moment battle loop. Magical attacks, limit breaks, and special abilities all feel good and come complete with their own individual animations and sound effects. In fact, I don't think any spell or ability repeats animations, which I find very impressive if I'm honest, since at the time I'm sure this was very labor intensive and would have undoubtedly been easier to reuse animations with only minor variations in them for the various spells. On the enemy's side, anywhere from 1 to 4 enemies can spawn at a time, and can be targeted individually or as a group if the spell or ability being used allows it. Like the player character, the enemies have their own momentum bars, which refills as the battle progresses, allowing them to attack when it reaches max, though we don't get to see their bars. On the other side, the player's own predetermined party, ranging anywhere from 1 to 3 characters, can be selected and instructed in how to perform in battle depending on the abilities each character has junctioned at the time. Upon defeating the last enemy, we're rewarded with a small victory animation from each character and a new screen breaking down the experience we've gained, the loot we've received, and notices if anything else occurred, like if we leveled up or one of our guardian forces learned a new ability or power. Overall, while this combat might not reinvent the wheel, it was fairly new to me at the time, and even all these years later holds its own. The remake version of the game also features a fast-forward function, which allows animations and the flow of time in battle to be sped up if the player so chooses. This can be nice when out grinding low levels or weaker enemies, and you know you won't need to use any fancy spells or abilities, but for the most part, I just enjoyed letting it play as it always did. Another interesting idea Final Fantasy VIII played around with was the use of magic and how it functions during combat. In most games, there are arguably 2 traditional styles for handling magic. 1, you have a limited number of casts per day, but you can refill your casts by resting or using special items or abilities. Or 2, you have an unlimited number of castings to your spells, but a smaller selection of spells to choose from. Or perhaps you're limited to only certain flavors of spells such as healing or illusions. Well, Final Fantasy VIII decided to try something different. Firstly, all characters can cast spells, so long as the Guardian Force creature they have equipped allows them to do so. And magic is considered a basic ability, so all Guardian Forces provide it. Secondly, all characters can cast all spells. Thirdly, magic can be found out in the natural world and drawn from areas called draw points, or can be siphoned away from other enemies in combat. And lastly, players can bank up to 99 castings of a spell, but can also choose to draw out a single casting of a spell from an enemy and immediately cast it upon them, thereby not using the player's own reserve of magic. As a result of this, players can quickly amass large amounts of spells from low-level monsters if they are willing to put in the time it takes to draw the spells out, monitor their health, and heal when necessary during these combat encounters. And while some players complain that this could be used to make the game too easy, I never found it to be a method to totally cheese the game, as the number of spells you receive is random, but seems to have a high likelihood of being less than the last time you drew, though not always. Another reason this system was pretty controversial at the time was that up until then, pretty much all the Final Fantasy games had stuck with the more traditional methods of handling magic, with certain characters unable to cast it at all, therefore creating designated magic casters, as well as those magic casters being limited by a traditional mana bar. This new system, however, allowed all characters to become proficient with magic, which some players felt diluted the character's impact or role within the cast, which to some degree I can understand. After all, a character like Zell, who's portrayed to be a martial artist and grappler, probably wouldn't spend much time practicing magic from a character writing perspective, whereas a character like Quizits or Selphie might dabble or excel in magic to make up for their lack of hard-hitting physical power. However, with the right ability investments via their guardian forces, any character can become a competent spellcaster and magic user. In some ways, this is great for a gameplay perspective. If one character runs out of a particular spell, you can simply cycle to a new character. And since all characters can pack healing spells, you no longer have to worry quite so much about keeping your healer alive in combat. Now, that's not to say players can't become specialized with certain types of magics, as Guardian Forces will naturally have access to various bonuses that center around their particular element, such as 20% fire damage from Ifrits or 15% ice damage from Shiva. Overall, I like the magic system in Final Fantasy VIII. While it may seek to homogenize all the characters, in the end, I never found that to actually be the case. In my experience, all characters would have a few basic spells along with some healing spells, while one or two characters would focus more on magic as a result of having a weaker physical attack. Was all that a lot? Feeling a bit overwhelmed? Good. So was 10-year-old me when I first played this game. I don't think I understood half of what this game was trying to teach me, which to me makes it even more impressive that I got as far as I did through sheer brute force and dumb luck. Heck, even with the strategy guide, I didn't understand most of it, and instead just followed the directions I was given, kinda like a student in class. Which is funny because we're about to take a test in the game. But not just any test. Oh no. There will be no Scantrons and number 2 pencils in this game. Instead, we're off to the neighboring country of the Daulat Dukedom. Our test? Nothing major, just help the rebel army repel a full-scale invasion from the rival nation of Galbadane, complete with live-fire rounds, enemy soldiers, and a very real chance of death and failure looming over us. Rightly so, our main character is a bit nervous, but we're assigned to Squad 12 and introduced to our teammates, Zell and Zephyr, who is to be our team leader. Quizit will also be joining us, but just as an observer and won't actually participate in the test. Leaving Balm Garden, we travel by car so as to avoid monster attacks to the nearby town of Balam before boarding a rapid assault boat and heading out to our test. This sequence is pretty cool. I like how the game actually makes you participate in the mission briefing instead of having it all be a cutscene. And when it does switch to cutscene, again, the graphics really do have this cinematic feel to them. From the incoming beach to landing to rushing out of the landing craft, I love how it transitions from cutscene to live gameplay. It's such a nice touch, and honestly, this trick may be old hat by now, but back then, I'm pretty sure this was the first time I'd ever seen anything like this. As soon as we land, it's time to complete our mission. Our orders are to drive away the Galbadane forces and then hold the town square until reinforcements from Daulat arrive. Of course, Zephyr, being the hot-headed narcissistic glory hog rival character that he is, baits us into disobeying those orders and instead makes us follow him to the old communications tower, which is supposedly haunted by some big monster. As we chase him, we encounter Selphie again, who's acting as a battlefield courier, and has orders for only the squad captain, Zephyr. Yes, I know, that hair is pretty wild looking. So with the knowledge that she'll only give the message to Zephyr, we rush off, Selphie in tow, to catch up. At the top of the tower, we witness a slightly comedic exchange between a Galbadane commander and foot soldier who are trying to fulfill their secret orders to get the communication array up and running again. I must say, this sequence here where the communication tower turns on is again breathtaking to me. Not only does it again pull the switch from gameplay to live action, but it does an amazing job of illustrating just how massive this tower and dish is, and just what an accomplishment getting it up and running again was. And it's here, atop the old communication tower relay, that we have a boss battle with a monster called Elvaret. Luckily, I remember that this is also our chance to snag a new Guardian Force, so I make sure to draw Siren from him right away. The kid gloves are off by this point, and this battle is actually pretty tough for me. Elvaret has a lot of health, around 2000 HP I think, and at most, my most powerful attacks only do 230 or so. He does have a weakness to ice though, which I exploit the best I can by spamming my Shiva Guardian Force. In the end, I do win narrowly, and after reaping my spoils, Selphie is finally able to deliver her message to Sepher, that the army is pulling back and we have 30 minutes to get to the beach or else we will be left behind. Shit! Racing back to the beach, we get as far as the outside of the tower before the Galbadane commander we defeated earlier pulls a spiteful dick move and summons some kind of mechanical spider to try and kill us. And again, this is not an easy fight, as not only do we have to beat this thing, but we have to do so on a timer. Even after our initial victory, the spider manages to repair itself and chase us back down the mountain and through the town, forcing us to do battle with it again if it comes into contact with our characters as we run. The first time I played this game, 10-year-old me just did not understand this battle. I spent a long time trying to kill this thing and then getting annoyed when it kept getting back up. Turns out, you don't beat a giant mechanical spider with magic, or by punching it, or by spamming forces of nature to wail on it. You kill it with good old-fashioned bullets and guns, as demonstrated by Quizits, who decides to use the spider as target practice just as we manage to hop on the last landing craft out of the city. And from there, it's a short but tense ride on the assault craft back to the town of Belem. Sepher, again being the hot-headed rival that he is pissed that we didn't single-handedly win the war for Dalet, while our character is more concerned that we might have blown our test since we didn't actually follow the instructions we were given during the mission briefing. Of course, Sepher's little fan club is waiting for him, and in a move so cliche it might as well be video game anime law at this point, he pulls a dick move by taking our car and making us walk back to Balm Garden. Small tangent here, just how far away is the city of Belem from Balm Garden? I don't think it's ever stated outright. I mean, it's obviously far enough that taking a car is considered the easiest way to get there, so it's not super close, but like, are we talking miles? Tens of miles? It's important because I need to know how hard to punch Sepher in the dick the next time I see him. One thing I don't normally talk about, but I feel bears special mention here, is the soundtrack for this game. Composed by Nobuo Uematsu, the soundtrack for this game, to me, is absolutely iconic. From the opening track of the first cutscene, to the battle theme that plays during combat, to the background music as you wander around the world. These songs are amazingly well done, and really help add that little extra something while you play. I'll be honest, some of these tunes have been stuck in my head since I first played this game. The victory tune at the end of combat, and the song Liberi Fatali, a Latin choir piece that is played during the introduction of the game and also acts as the sorceress's theme song, are both seared into my brain right next to the theme song for Sonic X and Navi's little "Hey, listen" from the Ocarina of Time. Officially, the soundtrack lists an impressive 73 total songs, all of which can be found on YouTube. I highly recommend this soundtrack to anyone who is a fan of JRPGs, enjoys late 90s adventure games, or just wants a varied but casual listening experience. I'm glad the music of this game is as good as it is. Since there's no spoken dialogue and minimal sound effects during the cutscenes, it is up to the music to do most of, if not all, of the heavy lifting when it comes to establishing tone and mood, which, if I'm honest, I think should be something modern games should try and do a better job at. Something I've started doing recently with modern games is going into the audio settings and turning off everything but the soundtrack before playing the game and listening to how the music interacts with the world and events in it. And while I will acknowledge that modern games certainly have more flexibility and trickery when it comes to their soundtracks and their ability to weave and sync them based off what is happening on screen, most of the music kind of fades away into an unintelligible theme. But things are different with Final Fantasy VIII. As I stated earlier, the song Liberi Fatali and the Battle Victory theme tunes are some songs that have been stuck in my head for over 20 years. And if I'm honest, I can't really think of a modern game that has done that. although American McGee's Alice the Madness Returns and Don't Nod Entertainment's Vampires opening theme song come to mind if I think for a minute. The graduation ceremony, if I'm honest, is a tiny bit of a letdown. I was expecting some big fanfare, or something like it is when you graduate high school or college in the United States. But it's not. Instead, me, Zell, Selfie, and some other random jabroni get called into the headmaster's office and told that we have passed the seed test. Though, if I'm completely honest, how? We're told Sepher didn't pass the test because he didn't follow the orders he was given, being told to hold the town square and instead choosing to rush off to the communications tower. But we followed him. We disobeyed our orders too. Now yes, I suppose some leniency could be given to us because Sepher was the captain and we were following his orders, but we still did the same thing Sepher did. So doesn't that mean that we shouldn't have passed either? The powers that be apparently don't think so, because we do pass, and after a brief ceremony with the headmaster and a small round of congratulations from our former classmates, we are told to get dressed and head to a party that is being thrown to celebrate. In typical anime broody boy fashion, we skulk in the corner and quietly sip our champagne while only talking to people when they come up and speak directly to us. And it is then, as we sip our drink and watch the people on the dance floor, that we meet a new character, a girl who comes up to us and asks us to dance. Then, when we refuse, she pulls us onto the dance floor and we're given a rather charming montage of her trying to teach us how to dance. No, it's this one. Gotta say, yes, this may be dated, but I'm digging the cutscene graphics for this game. I love how they go for a realistic, but still somehow Japanese fantasy style aesthetic, mixed with maybe some fantasy futurism for good measure. It's an aesthetic I really dig, and it's neat to see it done with these lower fidelity graphics. After we're done dancing, our dance partner gets called away and we make our way to a balcony to recover from what is probably the most we've ever interacted with another human being in our entire life. A little while later, our teacher Quizits finds us and, annoyed by our brooding antisocial behavior, orders us to go get changed and then accompany her to the secret area of the training hall where apparently students go after hours to break curfew. Not gonna lie, this whole bit is a little odd here. It's fairly obvious this secret place is the equivalent of Makeout Point, basically the place couples go when they want to have alone time and be intimate with each other. So why on earth is a teacher ordering us to take her there? Once there, Quizits reveals that she's been demoted from an instructor down to just a normal seed again. She also throws out this line about being a seed when she was 15 and then becoming an instructor when she was 17, which was 1 year ago. Kinda feels like the writers were trying to lead us to the conclusion that she's in love with us, and now that she's not a teacher anymore, she's free to pursue that once but no longer forbidden romance. Thankfully, our boy Squall knows that remaining an eternal virgin is by far the coolest thing any anime or video game protagonist can do, so he shuts that romance shit down hard, dropping this line about not wanting to bear others' burdens, and how if she wants someone to listen to her, she should just speak to a wall. I'm surprised Quizits continues to follow us after such a harsh response to her genuine feelings, but she does, and as we leave Makeout Point and head back through the training grounds, we hear a cry for help as the woman we saw back in the infirmary is being attacked by some kind of super bug-looking monster. The battle with the bug monster isn't too hard. I actually managed to one-shot 2 of his little roly-poly companion dudes with a GF before just wailing on the main guy until it finally dies. Afterwards, 2 wannabe ninjas from Naruto show up, tell the woman it's not safe here, and lead her away, leaving us confused, as when the woman called out, she knew both of our names, despite us having no idea who she is. Small tangent here. At this point, I also spent some time grinding in the training hall, and eventually encountered the legendary T-Rex battle that can occasionally spawn here. My normal attacks deal anywhere from 80 to 120 points of damage per attack, whereas my Guardian Forces can deal anywhere from 300-ish to 1500-ish, depending on which one I use. And it turns out, the T-Rex is weak to ice, which does make sense with it being a lizard and being cold-blooded and all. Yet, I could have sworn when I was a kid I was told to use fire magic to hurt it in battle. Point is, with the constant spamming of the GFs in this battle, I couldn't help but feel like I was playing a Pokemon game rather than a Final Fantasy game, which I found rather funny. During the first battle with it, he actually managed to kill Squall before Quizits could land the killing blow on him, which means that Squall lost out on all the experience points for the battle. Later on, after I got some more party members, I did go back and kick his ass though. I can't let him go thinking he's the top dog on campus, can I? The next day, we're given our first real mission as a seed. We're to go to the town of Timber, which is behind enemy lines, and once there, we're to meet with the local resistance that opposes the Galbadane occupation, and work with them to loosen Galbadane's grip on the country. We're told that our efforts in the seed test have had an effect on the war, and that Galbadane's forces have retreated from the city of Dalet, and are promising not to re-attack so long as the communication dish remains active, and the signal it is broadcasting is not interfered with. Okay. Anyone with a brain should know this is a very strange and highly suspect request. Your enemy spent how many soldiers to take the city, all for the purpose of repairing this tower and then activating it so they could send a signal to who knows where? Even if Dalet was in an absolutely desperate situation, they should know something is up with this tower and the signal it is broadcasting. At the very least, they should have people trying to figure out who's receiving the signal and what exactly it is saying. But none of that is our concern. Instead, we're given a secret code phrase to say, and then sent off with Zell and Sephi. One quick jaunt to Balam Town, and we find ourselves on a swanky train heading for Timber. Zell gives us some background on the small town, that it used to be surrounded by forests, but ever since it was taken over by the Galbadane forces, they've been logging and cutting down these trees. And it's about this time that the game throws an unexpected curveball at us. As we sit on the train, our characters slowly become woozy, passing out one by one until all 3 are unconscious, only to then reawaken in the bodies of 3 Galbadane soldiers, Laguna, Ward, and Kiros, as the 3 soldiers sneak their way through some monster-infested forests before hopping aboard an armored transport and then heading to the nearest town under the guise of a night of debauchery and drinking. In reality, Laguna just wants to go to the hotel lounge and watch a pretty lounge musician by the name of Julia. In typical anime fashion, Laguna fumbles the attempt to talk to her and instead slinks back to the table to drink away his sorrows and watch the girl of his dreams play the piano. Or at least he would have if pathetic soldiers with chronic leg cramps hadn't turned out to be exactly the type of man Julia likes, as after her performance, she approaches Laguna and invites him up to her room to talk in private. No, Laguna does not get lucky, but we are treated to an awkward, albeit kinda sweet sequence of him repeatedly making a fool of himself in front of the woman he's crushing on while trying to make small talk with her. He tells her about his life in the army, some of the things he's seen, and how when the war is over, he hopes to become a journalist so he can report on some of the things he saw and did during the conflict. If I'm honest, this sequence is a bit slow for my taste, but I get what the writers were going for. Up until this point, we've only ever seen Galbadane soldiers as nameless, faceless enemies to be killed, which this sequence seeks to make us more aware of the fact that the soldiers are people too, with their own hopes and dreams. It's a nice way to humanize them, without trying to make you feel outright bad for killing them when you have to. The scene ends with Laguna being yelled at by his superior officer that they've got new orders and are to report to a place called Centra and the mysterious excavation site located there. Overall, this dream sequence is okay. Just okay. I do kind of like how you see what the characters' inner thoughts are on what they're witnessing, as illustrated by these darker text and dialogue boxes, and some of their comments towards what they're witnessing is pretty funny. The whole romance thing with Julia, I mean, it's okay. I'm sure for the year of the game's release, 1999, she was pretty, and they do say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but I don't know, I just don't really see it. I did enjoy that the game auto-swapped our junctions and GFs though at the start of the dream sequence, that way we didn't have to manually do that ourselves. That was very much appreciated. Upon waking up, our trio of characters discusses their dream, but ultimately decides there's nothing any of them can do about it at the moment. So they are to continue with their mission and then report the strange collective dream when they get back to Belem Garden. Stepping off the train, the trio finds themselves in Timber Town, which I'm sad to say is a modern city and not some kind of industrialized lumberjack aesthetic that 10-year-old and 32-year-old me was low-key hoping for. After leaving the train, we're met by a young man who says the first part of the code phrase we were given previously. "Oh, the forests of timber sure have changed." To which we respond, "But at least the owls are still around." Fun fact here, you can actually pick the wrong response and still complete this mission, which I always found a little bit funny as it defeats the purpose of the secret passphrase in the first place. The young man introduces himself as Watts, and then has you follow him to a smaller second train that the forest owls are using as a kind of mobile base and hideout. And it's here that we're introduced to the resistance team we've been hired to help. Though first we're tasked with going to wake up the princess, who is also the leader, and who turns out to be the young lady we danced with at our graduation party. After a brief introduction and some expository dialogue, we learn that her name is Renoa and that she wants the help of the Seeds to liberate Timber City from the Galbadane occupation, and their plan to do so is actually pretty simple. The president for life of Galbad is on a train heading for Timber City. The rebels have made an exact replica of his train car, complete with a dummy stand-in. Their goal is to use us to help them uncouple the presidential train car, replace it with the fake one, then couple the president's car to the rebels' train, and hold the president hostage in return for the removal of Galbadane troops from Timber. Little tangent here, but I can't help but roll my eyes every time a piece of media gives someone the title of president, but also makes a point of saying that they hold this position for their entire lives. As an American, the idea of any president holding office for more than 8 years is almost insulting to me, as it goes against the very reason why the office exists in the first place. I know that in other countries the term is a little more malleable, but in my mind it's not. The sequence where we carry out this plan is pretty fun though. I love how it blends cutscene and active gameplay together. In fact, at times I can actually still move my character while the game is showing me a cutscene, which I find kind of funny. Jumping from train car to train car, we first work to uncouple the president's car, then replace it with the dummy car, before taking hold of the real car and making off with it. Little side note here, how did the people on the real train not feel any of this going on? They're supposed to be trained soldiers, yet they didn't feel the train lurching and shifting or changing speeds as the cars were swapped out? Anyways, after getting to a safe place, we party up with Renoa to confront the president. Things start out polite enough, but quickly become clear that this president is not only a fake, but actually a trap intended to kill us. For the first few rounds of combat, he maintains his facade, but after dealing enough damage, he drops his act and reveals himself to be an undead monster. This battle is actually pretty hard, since he has several attacks that can deal status effects like Blind, Berserk, and Silence. In fact, he actually kills me the first time we try to fight him, basically toying with me by applying Blind to my entire party, before hitting me with a Silence spell so I can't cure any of us, before slowly whittling down our health until there's nothing left. The second time around, I remember something the strategy guide told me years ago. Undead are weak to healing magic. In fact, if you use an item intended to resurrect a dead party member on an undead monster, it kind of does like an undead squared and kills them instantly. So I hawk a phoenix down at him, and sure enough, he dies in one hit. Returning to the rebel train, it's revealed that the real president has safely made it to Timber and is at the old TV station planning to make a major announcement. When the forest owls start talking about what to do next, Squall, rightly so, asks to see the contract that the Seeds are bound to. We get a small joke here where Renoa hands over the contract only for it to be in legalese gibberish that none of us understand, so she takes it back and hands us a much simpler contract that basically says we're bound to provide aid to the forest owls until either the town of Timber is liberated or until the Seed members are dead, as no replacements will be provided. Okay, firstly, I find it unrealistic that the Seeds in question, us, would not have been made aware of the terms of the contract prior to now. In fact, I would have expected us to have a hand in negotiating those very terms of the contract since it's our butts on the line. Secondly, this is such a dick move from the headmaster, basically signing over 3 rookie Seeds for the potentially indefinite assignment with no clause or way out of the contract other than completing the terms of the agreement or dying. If these were veteran Seed soldiers with years of experience, then I could maybe understand it, but this is literally our first mission. Rightly so, our companions Zell and Selphie complain about this, but what can we do? If we break the contract, then we'll be kicked out of the Seeds. So we go with Renoa, who tells us the new plan. Go to the TV station and again attempt to hold the Galbadane president hostage in exchange for Timber's independence. Real original, huh? Arriving back at Timber, we find that the local guards have not taken kindly to the attempted kidnapping of their president, and are not only stepping up their patrols, but are also harassing the locals for information on the rebels responsible. That is to say, us. We get a short cutscene of a commander trying to rein in his men, but to no effect, as each of them rushes off to do what they think he wants them to, only for him to be left standing alone with no one actually listening to him. Getting into the TV station where the president is, in all honesty, laughably easy. All we have to do is go down some stairs, fight some soldiers, duck into a bar, cajole this drunk to move his drunk ass, and then slip into a back alley, where from there, it's a quick jog up some stairs to a large Jumbotron-esque TV on the outside of the building. Once there, we have a bit of a moral tantrum with Renoa, who doesn't know what to do in this situation. Squall doesn't help out, but this is still justified by pointing out that she hired us, so all she has to do is tell us what she wants us to do, and we'll do it. She accuses us of being mercenaries, which is a pretty dumb argument since that's exactly what we are. We're here because you're paying us to be here. Nowhere in our agreement does it say that we have to believe the same things you do. And if you don't know what you want, then you are putting us in danger while we wait for you to figure this shit out. As the broadcast starts, the president appears and says that although his goal has always been for there to be peace, there are those who oppose this goal. Which is honestly just a tyrant saying, if you people would just do as I tell you and stop resisting, then we'd all have peace. And then tries to sell the idea of some summit he wants to convene for the other nations to basically surrender to him and his advisor, the sorceress. But as soon as he says all this, he is interrupted by Zephyr and Quizits, who burst into the station and disrupt the broadcast. Zephyr kills a few of the guards before grabbing the president and holding a blade to his neck, while Quizits tries to order him to stand down and then orders us to come and help her. We rush into the station and demand to know what Zephyr is doing. Zell, being the loudmouth blonde side character that he is, accidentally drops that we're all from a garden, which tips the president off that the gardens are now a possible source of enemies for him. Way to go, dumbass. Zephyr attempts to flee with the president, and after being backed into a corner is confronted by the sorceress herself, who seems to be channeling some pretty powerful mommy magic by calling him a little boy and saying she can help him and how he should join her and blah blah blah. Honestly, with how thick she's laying it on, she might as well have called him her little pog champ and tousled his hair. Of course, he joins her in typical anime rival fashion, and after waving so long to us, leaves with her by walking through a solid wall. Fleeing the TV station, our group, along with Renoa and Quizits, finds shelter in the house of another resistance leader, and it's there that we discuss what to do next, as well as get into another small fight with Renoa about Zephyr's fate and how Squall doesn't really care if he's alive or dead at this point, as those concerns are outside the parameters of his mission. In the end, it's decided things have progressed beyond the terms of the original contract, so they'll follow the rules of Seed and regroup with the nearest garden, which is the Galbadane Garden, which feels like a terrible idea since we're probably the most wanted people in Galbad territory at the moment. Nevertheless, one train ride later, and we're dropped off at the forest station. A short walk and 2 random encounters later, and we enter the forest on the outskirts of the Galbadane Gardens territory. Renoa has another little tantrum here because she doesn't think we're being supportive enough as a leader when our comrades start to worry about the consequences of what just happened at Timber. But we're luckily saved from that when our characters start to hear a somewhat familiar whining sound and begin to pass out one by one. When we awaken, we're back in the shoes of Laguna, Ward, and Kiros, who are all completely lost because Laguna brought the wrong map with him. Laguna voices that he has a bad feeling about what's going on in the place they are at though, and sure enough, a few steps later, we're confronted by a group of Estar soldiers. 2 quick back-to-back battles, and we find ourselves in some kind of mining operation that the Estar are running. As a kid, I can remember being really confused by this level. I don't think I realized that it looped around on itself so many times, so I'd spend hours wandering the hallways thinking they were different, when in reality they were the same hallways, just me coming from them at different angles. Throughout the facility, we get some chances to sabotage things in comedic ways. We fiddle with a floor panel mechanism so it'll drop whoever steps on it next. We push some boulders down some hills and watch as Estar soldiers play Indiana Jones as they run for their lives. We push a detonator and blow up some boulders along our way. It's all pretty fun actually, and makes me smile as I continue on. Eventually, we're confronted by the mine overseer, and after we defeat him, he pulls a spite move and attacks Kiros and Ward even after he should be dead, instead reducing both of them down to a single HP before dying. Nearly dead, both Kiros and Ward collapse, with Ward suffering some kind of damage to his throat and not being able to speak properly anymore. Laguna, ever the optimist, correctly points out that they're on a cliff overlooking the ocean, and that below them are some boats that they can use to get away and return to Galbadane. In a sequence that got an audible laugh out of me, Laguna helps his wounded comrades to their feet before tossing them off the cliff into the waters below, while commenting, "Wow, you guys are pretty brave. You have any idea how high up we are?" before trying to find a safer way down, only to slip and fall, crashing into the waters below like his friends. Upon waking up, Squall and party decide to keep going, since stopping to wonder about these blackouts in the middle of a forest infested with monsters would be counterproductive. Another random encounter or two when we find ourselves at the Galbad Academy, who gives us shelter and directs us to wait on the second floor, while Quizitz explains the situation to the headmaster. After what I think is meant to be a few hours, she returns and explains that the headmaster has agreed to help us complete our mission, though he needs time to prepare. She also tells us that, officially, Zephyr has been tried and executed for his attempt on the Galbadane president's life. This news makes Renoa break down, and she confesses that she and Zephyr were close and possibly engaged in a romantic relationship prior to the events of this game. The news also makes Squall begin to reflect on mortality and wondering what people will say if and when he dies. If I'm honest, I'm not a fan of how this part is written. It makes Squall come off as self-centered when he declares, "I won't have it," startling everyone in the room before running out and saying no one's going to speak of me in the past tense. I get what they're going for with this, trying to make Squall seem like he's having a small panic attack, but it just doesn't work since there's no follow-up to it. There's no scene where Squall calms down or vents his frustrations or reflects on what we've just learned. We exit the reception room and then immediately proceed to what I think is supposed to be the next day, because when I go down the stairs, Zell is doing push-ups with the other workout junkies, despite having been in the reception room only a few seconds ago. After a bit of wandering around, we're called to the front of the garden where the headmaster meets us and explains the situation. As we guessed previously, the peace talks that Galbad has called for are fake, and other nations of the world are afraid of the sorceress, and Galbad is hoping to use that to force them into surrendering. There are even concerns that the sorceress will attempt to take over the gardens and use them as her own private base. Small tangent here, how exactly do these gardens work? They seem to be a combination of military and college for mercenaries, which would make them a private military, but they don't seem to be affiliated with any of the regional governments that the gardens themselves reside in, which I find kind of odd. While I'm not exactly sure how it works in the real world, private military organizations usually do have agreements with the local governments of whatever country they are based out of. But the gardens seem to be completely independent from the territory that they're stationed in, and possibly even each other. So what exactly is their structure and how do they work? Can anyone form a garden? Is there any kind of oversight for them? Who do they report to? So many questions that I don't think ever get answered. Obviously, the gardens themselves are not interested in being under the control of Galbad or the sorceress, so they issue us a new order. Go to the city of Dealing and meet an ally of the gardens before then assassinating the sorceress via sniper or any other means necessary. To assist us, Galbad Gardens is sending their best sniper to travel with us and take the shot when the time comes. And with that, we're told to head out and complete our mission. So, confession time here. I had to turn off the game here, and when I came back I had forgotten the directions the headmaster gave me, so I basically spent 45 minutes wandering around the world map, killing monsters and looking for where I was supposed to go, not realizing that the train station I was actually looking for was like 10 feet from the Galbad Gardens. Sometimes not having control over the camera really sucks in this game, and I will confess that after about 30 minutes, I started to get really annoyed that there wasn't a journal or objective marker or possibly reminder to help me out. Anyways, we hop aboard the train and are whisked away to Dealing City. Since we've met our last recruitable character, let's take a moment to talk about the companions in this game. Squall, as the main character of a late 90s JRPG, is of course a brooding bad boy style character. That being said, he actually has something to brood about, which does kind of set him apart from other brooding bad boy characters. Throughout the game, Squall will question himself and his actions, trying to determine if what he is doing is right or if he's good enough to even pull them off. As someone who personally struggles with self-confidence, I can relate to this quite a lot, which helps kind of bond me with Squall as a character. I will admit, at times I do miss the modern touch of being able to decide what my character will actually say in certain situations, as there are a few times in the game where I wish I had more control over his dialogue. Also, not to tick anyone off or anything, but I do sometimes wonder if Squall is maybe slightly on the spectrum. His lack of social skills and highly analytical mind, combined with his reluctance to speak and his constant introspection, reminds me a bit of people who have Asperger's or just plain social anxiety. Funny tangent actually, I got kind of curious and looked it up. Asperger's became a recognized neurodevelopment disorder in 1989, but became more widely known and accepted in 1994. So I suppose it's possible that the writer of Final Fantasy VIII, Kazushige Nojima, might have written the character with these traits in mind. Then again, it's just as possible that he didn't, and Squall's character is just naturally this way, or perhaps as a result of the side effects that come from GF junctioning, which we'll discuss later. Also, while doing that research, I found an old GameSpot forum post that was debating this very question, with the oldest post being from 2010. Several people pointed out that Squall's behavior, while similar to people with Asperger's syndrome, isn't nearly as severe as most cases are, meaning that if he does have the condition, it is incredibly minimal. But again, there's no actual confirmation that he has the condition. Anyways, I just think it's kind of interesting that as far back as 2010, people have been having the same thoughts I had. Zell fills the anime role of energetic, excitable blonde character who's also the protagonist's best friend. Heck, when we first meet him, he's literally doing martial arts in the hallway of Balm Garden, which labels him as a weeb for life in my eyes. Despite this, I actually really like him. I like his cheery attitude and the way he just instantly nominates himself to be Squall's best friend. It makes me think there's a history between these two that we sadly never really get to learn about. I also find his little running gag about him always wanting hot dogs from the school cafeteria, but always being blocked by one thing or another, to be pretty funny. In my playthroughs, I found Zell is really good at applying status effects, so I usually tried to junction him with abilities that would induce such effects on my enemies during combat. Zell may have a bit of a temper issue, as when he's called chicken wuss by several characters, he immediately is ready to fight about it. Zell also has a secret subplot about a crush he has on a girl, which apparently is pretty complicated to trigger, so sadly, I never got to see it. Quizitz is one of our teachers at the start of the game, though she feels a bit more like a dorm mother or guidance counselor than anything else. For the first few hours of the game, she helps the player by teaching them the various systems and also providing background context to what it is you're actually doing. If I'm honest, I can remember 10-year-old me being really annoyed with her and the fact that she never shuts up, but older me does appreciate the tutorials she gives me now that I'm old enough to understand their importance. Overall, I think her design is pretty okay, though they definitely lean into the sexy teacher librarian vibes with her a bit. After our seed test, she reveals that she was being tested as an instructor, and that unfortunately she has failed, so she's been demoted back to a seed. Which explains why she accompanies us for so much of the game, which is something I don't really think I noticed or understood when I was a child playing this game for the first time. Selphie strikes me as the character in an anime that fills the childhood friend or younger sister role. She's a bit clumsy and has that eternally bubbly yet somehow at the same time bossy attitude that anime characters sometimes have, but I've never actually seen in a real person that didn't make them seem crazy, or at the very least tedious to be around. Her subplot about being on the festival committee is okay. Early on, she asks you to join the committee, and she even has you run a few small quests to complete them. Selphie definitely takes the role of an innocent and optimistic character in the cast, which can make her a bit annoying at times when she comes off as strangely childish. She's not as much of a physical powerhouse in combat as other characters, so I tend to use her as a spellcaster and healer main, though she can hold her own against low-tier enemies. Rinoa is a difficult character to talk about because she goes through so many changes and phases throughout this game. In the beginning, she's almost childish in her attitude. She gets mad at Squall and company when they reveal that they don't share her interest in a free timber and are only helping because their contracts say they have to. And then again, when Squall says Sepher might be dead for his attempt to take the Galbadane president hostage. Later on, she mellows a bit though and starts to take the weight of leadership in the resistance more seriously, realizing that sacrifices will have to be made if she wants her goal to happen, while asking herself just what is she prepared to lose to see her goals accomplished. Rinoa is also hard written to be Squall's ongoing love interest during most of the game, but if I'm honest, as a player, I never really felt a sense of attraction to her. Irving definitely comes off as a caricature of a cowboy when you first meet him. Between his cowboy hat, cowboy duster, cowboy chaps, and the fact that he uses a shotgun for his weapon, he definitely feels like a parody of an old western cowboy, mixed with some of that Japanese influence that all the characters have. Cocky and a bit of a flirt, Irving likes to talk himself up a lot when you first meet him, coming off as carefree and very aloof, almost to a degree that makes him feel delusional. As the events of the game carry on, though, we start to see the cracks in his attitude, revealing a deeply insecure and self-conscious person. I remember liking Irving a lot after certain events in the story, with his character becoming more humble and believable as the story goes on. Though I did still appreciate his little flirts with the female characters from time to time, I thought that was just a nice touch that they kept. Overall, the characters of Final Fantasy VIII are a bit of a cliche grab bag of concepts and tropes that are dated by today's standards, but at the time were less overused and more experimental. The group definitely has the feel of a group of individuals that are all misfits, all with their own set of skills that the group needs to survive. And I certainly enjoy the writing of them, so overall I think it's a good cast of characters. Dealing City is interesting. 10-year-old me had a really hard time remembering where things were in this city. I don't think I actually realized I could ride the buses that are constantly rolling around the levels, which I must admit is a nice touch and does a decent job of giving the impression that the city is bigger than just what we see. Our ally in the city turns out to be a high-ranking Galbad general, but the guard stationed outside his home doesn't seem to have gotten the memo that the general is expecting us. Instead, we're sent on a mission to a nearby tomb of an unknown king as a test of our strength. Officially, we're supposed to run in and get the serial number off some dropped sword or something like that that's only 2 rooms in. He also warns us not to go wandering around as we might never come back alive. This dungeon was actually pretty hard for me as a kid. The dungeon's gimmick is that while you do have a map of the space, and you can buy a location indicator for 5,000 gil, the dungeon's perspective will shift depending on what hallways and passages you take. The easiest way I can think of to explain this is to think of a 4-way room like a compass, with north, south, east, and west being the directions you can move in. If I choose to go east, then the next room I appear in will have rotated, so I will be starting from the western side facing east rather than north. Overall, it might not be a complicated gimmick, but it can be confusing if you're not used to reading a map and having to shift your perspective as you travel. An issue that modern games have solved by allowing mini-maps to rotate with the player as they travel. And just what you may ask is our reward for successfully navigating this dungeon? Well, first we do battle with a monster called the Guardian. I'll be honest, the game wants me to cast Float on him so he'll stop regenerating his health, but I kind of forgot this and just brute forced him with some GFs, which are getting pretty powerful I might add, since I've been grinding out their abilities and power-ups as I travel. After beating him the first time, he runs away and we have to travel to either side of the dungeon to unblock a water wheel before opening a channel for the water to flow through, and then returning to the entrance where a new bridge has appeared, granting us access to the tomb at the center of the ruins. And it's here that we face off against the second wild GF in the game, the Brothers. This battle is actually pretty tough. The small brother deals a ton of damage and actually manages to down both Zell and Irving with his sweeping party-wide attacks, even with me having unlocked HP junctioning and boosting both of their health with magic. Luckily, I do remember to use Float on him so the smaller brother doesn't continue regenerating health throughout the entire fight. Several GF summons later, and the brothers both fall and agree to join me. Returning to Dealing City, we're finally granted access to the general, who turns out to be Renoa's father. Dun dun dun! His motivations for helping us aren't exactly clear though, and even now I'm not entirely sure why he's doing it, but he's got a plan which is more than we have at the moment. That night, there will be a parade, during which the sorceress will be on a parade float that will travel between this massive archway at exactly 2000 o'clock, 8 p.m. for those of you who don't speak military time. Our group will split up into 2 teams, with one team hiding and waiting for that exact moment to drop a set of metal gates shut, trapping the sorceress's float inside the archway, while the second team will have scaled the clock tower and reached a vantage point amongst the tower's holographic mechanisms that will trigger at the same time, during which Irving will take the shot and assassinate the sorceress. Overall, it sounds like a logical and well thought out plan, which tells me right away that it's not going to work. Just as we're about to leave, Renoa appears and tries to change things by presenting the party with an Odine amulet, which supposedly can block or at least diminish the sorceress's powers. Surprisingly, it's Quizits who becomes annoyed with Renoa this time, and her sudden attempt to change the plan, and she berates Renoa for treating this like a game and not having an actual plan for what to do with the amulet. Annoyingly, Renoa's response is to sit on the floor and pout while the rest of us go off to do our jobs. Of course, as I mentioned before, such a well thought out and clear plan can't possibly succeed, and sure enough, several issues arise almost immediately. Firstly, Quizitz, feeling guilty for yelling at Rinoa, decides to leave her post and go back to apologize. Secondly, Zell and Sephi go with her despite her ordering them to stay at the archway. I actually find this sequence funny in a really dumb kind of way. We can actually see Rinoa's father heading back to his mansion, which is the same place we're going, so it gives the impression that he escorted us to our post, turned around, and within 10 seconds we decided to say, fuck the mission, his daughter's feelings are more important. Thirdly, Rinoa isn't even there when we get there. After a brief conversation with her father, she rightly deduces that she's about to be locked in the room she's in, and dashes out through the same door we used to rush into the room before becoming trapped. The timing of all of this could not be more ridiculous, as there's about 5 seconds between the time that Rinoa dashes out and we appear in the room, using the exact same door that she did, meaning we were either running through the mansion with our eyes closed, or we apparently were so distraught over having hurt Rinoa's feelings that tears must have blinded us and we didn't see her literally leaving the room directly in front of us. As you can probably guess, I don't like this sequence. I didn't when I was a kid, and I don't now. I think it's pretty stupid that a professional mercenary and former instructor would care that much about hurting someone's feelings that they would jeopardize their mission. And I feel it's equally stupid that the other two characters felt the need to accompany her instead of staying behind to complete their mission, the whole reason that they're there. It only takes one person to throw the switch, yet Quizitz, Zell, and Selphie all went and wound up getting locked in. At the same time, I find Rinoa to be pretty much insufferable here. She really doesn't have a plan. She found an object that might help, but has no way to actually use it. The smart thing to do would be to go ahead with the already formulated plan, but keep the amulet in your back pocket just in case an opportunity presents itself where it might be of use. Instead, she wants to completely scrap this plan so they can use her plan instead. It's selfish and narrow-minded thinking, wanting to use her plan because she thinks that she knows best. And her plan completely backfires. Not only does the sorceress sense the deception and destroy the amulet, she takes Rinoa hostage by using some kind of mind control ability on her before delivering a speech to the cheering and adoring crowds about how she's basically going to kill them all and enjoy watching them all die, while everyone continues to cheer and wave at her. She even kills the Galbadane president in front of everyone, and no one so much as questions it. I suppose they could think it's all an act, or perhaps some kind of spell, but I still find it a bit odd that no one questioned any of this, if I'm honest. The sorceress's introduction, though, is pretty badass. I love this shot of her manipulating her hair and dissolving the helmet or visor that she's wearing. Even with these dated graphics, I can't help but admit that this character model is beautiful, with super expressive eyes and wonderful looking skin. I also really dig the asymmetry of her headpiece and how she truly looks alien and foreign to just about any other character we've met so far. And it leaves me asking just what exactly is a sorceress? And all of this is kicked into overdrive when the parade actually starts and we're treated to an absolutely gorgeous cinematic. In fact, this entire sequence here is probably one of my favorite in the entire game. It again mixes cinematics with the ability to move my character while things are happening around me. Rushing past the parade, Squall notes that not only is Sepher alive, but he seems to be riding on the float with the sorceress as her right-hand man now. But we have more important things to worry about as we rush to Rinoa's aid just as she's about to be lunched to two lizard statues that the sorceress brought to life I make sure to draw the GF carbuncle from them before I whoop both their asses before using my already equipped GFs before the three of us make our way to the clock tower and wait for our chance. Meanwhile, Quizits and the others are still trapped in the General's mansion. There's a small puzzle here to escape involving a statue, a painting, and a wine glass, but this sequence is burned into my brain from when I first played this game, so I don't waste any time, and soon enough the party finds itself wandering around the Dealing City sewers. As a child, I remember this sequence being really confusing. Also, I could have sworn there used to be a timer for how long we had to find our way out. Adult me isn't as confused though, and we find our way out without too much trouble, though I do take some time and battle a few creatures down here for the experience and the items they drop, before emerging from the sewers and rushing to take our position to throw the switch just as the clock strikes 2000 hours. Just as the general planned, the sorceress's float is in place, and we're granted a cutscene of the metal gates slamming shut, trapping her within the arch. Although I will point out that we've seen her walk through solid walls and doors before, so at best this is only a temporary trap to her. Cut back to the first team and we discover Irving having a bit of a meltdown, saying how the shot will make history and how he can't do it because of the pressure. Squall gives him some encouragement and talks him up for a moment, which allows him to take the shot, which the sorceress deflects with some kind of barrier. Oh well, time for plan B. Leaping from the clock tower, Squall rushes the panicked crowd, hijacking a car and racing towards the arch before crashing the vehicle and slipping through the bars, in a sequence that I think is actually pretty badass. Once on the float, he confronts Sepher and the two of them do battle and trade insults. In real life, it's getting pretty late right now, so I rely pretty heavily on my GFs to mop the floor with him before turning to the sorceress and being joined by Renoa and Irving. The battle with the sorceress Edea isn't super difficult if you understand how her AI works. Being a sorceress, she doesn't have many, or possibly any, physical attacks, instead relying on magic, which makes sense, she's the sorceress after all. So by using my newly acquired GF Carbuncle, which casts Reflect on my entire party, I can distract Edea and force her to cast Dispel on my party to strip away their magical defenses, while I get in a good shot or two before starting the cycle all over again. I will say one thing that does annoy me with this is the GF Siren is basically worthless against the sorceress, but realistically would be devastating to her. Siren's secondary ability is the ability to silence those that are hit with her attack, making them incapable of casting magic or using their special abilities. Now I know that from a gameplay perspective, this would probably break the fight at a fundamental level, leaving the sorceress unable to attack or make any kind of mood, which would cause the battle to lock up and prevent us from continuing. But realistically, I feel like this is exactly the kind of enemy Siren was made to combat, so it's just annoying that it doesn't work on her. Instead, I take turns blasting her with my GFs, summoning Carbuncle to recast Reflect on us, and wailing away on her with our normal attacks until she's decided that she's had enough and conjures a dozen or so ice spears before hurling them at us. Renoa and Irving manage to avoid the attack, but Squall, perhaps fatigued from everything that's happened prior to this, isn't so lucky, and instead finds himself impaled in the shoulder and thrown from the float with a vision of Renoa reaching for him as the last thing he sees before his vision fades to black. Thus ends Disc 1 of Final Fantasy VIII. On to Disc 2. When the screen fades back in, we again find ourselves no longer following Squall, but instead with Laguna, who's ditched his military uniform and is now taking care of a little girl named Elone, and warning her of the dangers of wandering around the village without an adult, before being told there is someone at the bar waiting for him. I take a minute or two to explore the house I'm in, draw some magic, and what the fuck happened here? Why does my dining room look like it's been in a gangster-style shootout? Did I drop my fully loaded machine gun one night while cleaning it and just shot up my dining room? What the hell? Anyways, we head to the bar, and after talking to a local woman named Rain, we're greeted by our old friend Kiros from our soldiering days. A brief conversation reveals that after jumping off the cliffs from the previous S-Star facility, Laguna was washed away and wound up in this little village where he was nursed back to health by Rain, and since then he spent the last year or so here. Since all the able-bodied men have been sent off to the war, he now works as the village's monster exterminator to try and repay the people for their kindness in nursing him back to health. Kiros and Ward, meanwhile, were rescued by Galbad forces. Kiros has since left the military and has spent the time looking for Laguna, either to reunite with his friend or to give him some closure if Laguna turned out to be dead. Ward has also left the army and is now employed as a janitor at some prison. Happy to have finally found us, Kiros joins us and we spend the afternoon wandering around the village, fighting off random monster attacks, and chatting with our former friend who notices very quickly that we have changed. Whereas before we were loud and outgoing, now we're a bit more reserved and more fearful of protecting the people around us, and less eager to leave and see the world. At the end of the afternoon, we return to Rain and Elone, and overhear Elone asking Rain if she is in love with Laguna, to which Rain denies in the classic, "No, I don't like him, 'cause I'm hopelessly in love with him" kind of way that anime likes to do. Later, when Kiros and Laguna are alone and resting, Laguna lets down his guard and reveals that lately he's been scared that when he closes his eyes, he won't be in the same place when he opens them again, that he'll be somewhere else and unable to protect Elone and Rain. Hearing this line, I can't help but wonder if perhaps his time in the army and nearly dying with his friends has given Laguna a bit of PTSD, or possibly a protector's complex. It's definitely an interesting development for the character. While we're talking about a character who slays them, let's discuss the monsters in this game. Initially, they come off as slightly Pokemon-esque in the first few areas, but quickly they become so much more. With designs ranging from humanoid and organic looks, to mechanical, to alien, to horror-inspired, and just about everything in between. Each has their own strengths and weaknesses, and if you use the scan ability, you'll find that they all have little bios and lore about them as well, offering a tiny little insight into the wider world of Final Fantasy VIII. Honestly, I love the monster designs in this game. Sure, some of them look kinda dopey and harmless, but the sheer number and variety of the monsters you'll run into is astounding. Yes, it can be a bit annoying when you're lost and wandering around to fight the same enemies over and over and over and over again, but as someone who's used to grinding in modern games, this doesn't bother me so much here. Not only that, but the lore where monsters come from is actually pretty cool too, as in-game we're shown a rare stellar phenomenon known as a lunar cry, which creates a temporary bridge between the Earth and the Moon that allows monsters to freely travel from one to the other, and is regarded as the source of how monsters came to be on Earth in the first place. I remember watching this sequence as a child and being stunned by it. The idea was so different from anything I'd ever read or seen before. Monsters coming from the moon? Up until then, I'd read a few fantasy novels that tried to explain monsters as corrupted animals or else the results of magical experiments that had gone wrong and had escaped their containment. But the idea that not only are monsters naturally occurring, but that they're actually some kind of an invasive species that comes from the friggin' moon, that was something totally new and cool to me at the time. And still today. This next part jumps back and forth between perspectives a lot, but for the sake of the video, I'm going to join these segments together so they're a little easier to follow. When we awaken, we're with Zell, Quizets, Selphie, and Rinoa, all of whom have been taken prisoner by the Galbadane military and are wondering what's going to happen to them, as well as where is Squall. After some initial work, the group figures out that there's some kind of anti-magic field that prevents them from drawing magic from each other, but appears to only weaken their ability to cast magic that they already have. And Zell realizes that this place is familiar to him. That Ward, the character he views when he blacks out, works here or had worked here in the past. After being harassed and beaten up by some guards, Rinoa is taken away and the remaining party is left to wonder about their fate. A short while later, a small furry creature called a Moogle is bringing Zell, Quizets, and Selphie some food when it trips and spills the plate of food all over the floor. Proving that they are all jerks, the guards assigned to our cell berate the Moogle before attempting to beat it, only for Zell to stand up to the guard and threaten him. The guard backs down and we befriend the Moogle, who helps Zell sneak out of his cell and then lead him up to the next floor where a group of soldiers are holding our weapons and admiring them. One quick beatdown later and we return to the group and rearm ourselves just in time for a pair of familiar soldiers to come into our cell expecting us to be defenseless. Another quick battle later and we bust our way out of our cell with the help of the Moogle and begin to make our way to the top of the prison where Squall is being held. During all of that, Squall, it turns out, is in an isolation cell and is just starting to get his bearings when his cell is plucked from the wall and moved by a large crane mechanism at the command of Zephyr, who appears and spends a few minutes abusing and mocking us before having us dragged off for an interrogation. During the torture, Zephyr demands to know the true purpose of seeds. When we don't give him what he wants, he has his little friend throw the switch and jolt us to help us jog our memory. Joke's on you, buddy, that was like 4 to 6 hours ago gameplay-wise, and I don't remember anything I was told. As he tortures us, Zephyr mocks us by saying next he'll torture our friends, and how this has been his big romantic dream all along, to be someone powerful and in charge of others, which he is now since he's the sorceress's knight. Rightly so, Squall points out that no, at this moment he's just a lowly torturer, which is even less than he was before he failed to become a seed. Being the delusional villain that he's become, Zephyr scoffs at this and monologues for a moment about how the seed hunt will soon begin and he'll hunt down every last one of them for Idea before leaving to watch the missile launch that he's about to fire at Belem and Tribad Gardens, leaving us to continue being tortured by some rando henchmen for a while before we black out. When we come to, several Moogles have gathered around us and are calling us Laguna before our friends show up and help us to our feet. Zell explains that he can work the controls for the crane that brought us up here, and we can use it to ride our way down to the bottom of the prison and escape, though he'll have to stay here at the control room to do it. One short elevator ride later, we open a door at the bottom of the prison and are met with a pile of sand. Turns out the prison we're being housed at is underground. The sound of distant gunshots alerts us that Zell is in trouble, so we rush back to help him, which involves us making our way up the floors of the prison and back to the top. Prior to this, if we spoke with some of the Moogles, they can open little shortcuts for us, which helps cut down on the number of battles that we have to do here. Did I mention that at the beginning of this sequence, all the magic my characters had stored up until this point is gone? So I'm basically having to restock my magic on the fly, while not taking too much damage during battles. It's tricky, but kind of fun in a way. About midway up the prison, we see Zell cornered and about to get shot, only for Irving and Renoa to show up and save him. Turns out, Renoa's father pulled some strings to get his daughter out of jail, and Galbad thinks that Irving is still on their side since he's from the Galbad Gardens, so he hasn't been arrested at all. One quick conversation while under enemy gunfire and we decide to split up again, with one group making their way to the top of the prison so as to work the controls to unbury it, while the other group works as a distraction for the guards and monsters that are now swarming the base. Squall and party make their way to the top of the prison and then using the crane they'd rode down on previously, give Group 2 a lift so they won't have to run and gun the whole way up to the top. Once outside, it's revealed that the prison is 3 large screw-shaped structures that can burrow or unburrow into the surrounding sands when the situation demands it. One quick battle with the warden and 2 mini Gundam robots later, we start to make our way across a catwalk only for the prison to activate and begin to bury itself again. We're given another pretty cool cutscene, and Squall is forced to shimmy his way along a narrow ledge to keep from falling into the swirling, churning sands below. Once on the other side of the bridge, we're given a pretty lame fade to black and then fade in again, which shows our party stealing military vehicles from some kind of garage and driving away from the prison. Admittedly, this is kind of a cop-out for this section, but I'm a bit tired of jumping back and forth between perspectives, so I'll let it slide. Once a safe distance away, the group stops to discuss what to do next. Missiles are being fired at Belem and Tribad Gardens, which is deeply upsetting to Selphie since she's from Tribad Garden, prior to transferring to Belem. In the end, it's decided that we'll once again split up. Squall, Renoa, and Zell will go to Belem and try to warn them, while Irving, Quizits, and Selphie will go to the missile base and try to stop any more missiles from firing. I'll be honest, this segment is always kinda just meh to me. Taking control of Selphie and party, we dress as Galbad soldiers and are given the option to try and maintain our cover for as long as possible, or else immediately blow our cover in favor of just fighting our way through the base. Eventually, we gain access to the missile guidance terminal and are able to upload new orders to the already launched as well as future missiles. As someone who works with computers for a living, the idea that a system would have a margin for error slider like that is kinda ridiculous. Like, imagine if I told a printer to print something but then set the margin of error slider to max. Would it just print something completely random? Or like if I set an alarm clock with the max error setting turned on, would the alarm just go off at the blatantly wrong time? It's such a random and half-assed plot idea that I can't help but laugh at and find really funny. Anyways, after messing with the already launched missiles, we make our way to the base control room where our deception is finally caught and we're forced into combat. Fine by me, I hated all this sneaking around anyways. One mandatory battle later and we decide to set the base to explode, giving ourselves 10 minutes to escape. Rushing to leave the base, we find our way blocked by some kind of tank and are forced into combat once again. In truth, the first time I did this battle, I died, and I had to redo this entire mission again because I didn't save my game properly. The second time, I forgot to finalize the changes to the missile settings, so I again failed the mission and had to do it all over a third time. This time I succeeded and managed to do everything right. The problem being that by killing the tank, we've effectively blocked ourselves into this base with no way out. Our characters are given a moment to mourn and grieve, each of them realizing this is probably the last moments of their lives before the base explodes in another beautiful, albeit sad, cutscene. Meanwhile, Squall and party arriving back at Balm Garden find it in utter chaos. The garden staff seems to be rioting and are demanding that the headmaster be found immediately and killed if necessary. Monsters from the training hall have been let loose and students are being forced to pick sides between Sid the headmaster and someone calling themselves the garden master. We're actually given a chance to use some subterfuge here and side with the unknown garden master, which would allow us to avoid some fights in the future. But honestly, were I in that situation, I'd definitely be asking more questions, which apparently is the wrong choice and gets me labeled as a Sid sympathizer and attacked. The garden is in complete chaos, and so we spend the next 30 or so minutes running around to each of the different branches of the building to offer support to the various students and seeds that are still loyal to Sid against the garden master's forces. For the most part, I'm able to hold my own, except in the training center where the overseer pulls my old nemesis, the T-Rex, out of his hat. First time, he whoops my ass, killing the entire party in 2 hits because I stupidly didn't cure Zell of his blindness, making him miss his opening attack and thereby not putting the T-Rex to sleep. Second time though, I introduced the dino to the back of Zell's fists like a pro. After clearing the various branches of the garden, we're directed to locate the garden assistant Sue, who's been in hiding but we spot going up to the 2nd floor. Small tangent, I find it annoying that she isn't visually distinct in any way. Like normally characters that are in some way important to the story have different clothes or are some way visually distinct from the nameless background characters, but she looks exactly the same as all the other students running around. Anyways, she reveals that the headmaster is still in his office. Okay, hold up. That would be the very first place anyone would think to look for him. Now, yes, his office could in theory be locked down because you need the elevator to reach it, but the idea that the garden master's forces are tearing the garden apart looking for him, and this old man is just hiding in his office is just plain stupid, no matter what argument you try to give it. So we make our way there and Sid explains that before this place was a garden, it was some kind of shelter. He gives us a key and tells us to go down to the basement and see what we can find that might possibly help protect the garden against the incoming missiles. This is the very definition of a long shot, but it's all we got, so of course we're going to do so. We get a little reminder that elemental weaknesses are a thing, and the advice to junction fire magic to our attacks when we enter some kind of underground fuel depot located under the garden. The levels down here are pretty small between transitions, but do an interesting job of hinting at just how large the garden is and how far it extends underground. Seriously, this place is like an iceberg. In particular, I love this shot right here, as it really illustrates just how far down we're going. And what do we find when we reach the bottom? Turns out the garden has some kind of engine that Squall manages to get up and running while just hitting random buttons in a panic. I actually really love this exchange where Zell asks him what he's doing and Squall just yells, "I don't know." There's just something about it that got a laugh out of me because at this point, no one knows what to do, so why not push all the buttons and hope for the best? Nothing that happens could be worse than the missiles coming for us right this very minute. And as it turns out, flipping those switches and pressing those buttons is exactly what we needed to wake up the old garden engine, which quickly powers itself up while transporting us and the control panels back to the headmaster's office. Turns out, the garden is a mobile base that can sorta hover and move around like a hovercraft. Who knew? We get a pretty dramatic shot of the missiles as they strike where the garden would have been, along with a slightly comedic moment where we all breathe a sigh of relief, only to panic once more as we realize we're about to crash into Balam Town. Once again, pushing random buttons and switches saves the day, and we instead land in the nearby ocean, saving the town and turning us into a seafaring vessel for the moment. A few days later, while we're showing Renoa around the now adrift garden, we're told by the garden overseers that the garden master Norg is waiting for us, and that we are to go see him right away. Taking the elevator back down to the basement, we're given a short scene of Sid arguing with Norg before the mysterious garden master turns his attention to us. And I gotta be honest, this guy is weird. Firstly, he's not human, but instead a member of some hidden tribe that I've not heard about until now. He reveals that the order to assassinate the sorceress never came from Balm Garden, and was instead a mission for the Galbadane Garden to carry out, but their headmaster tricked us into doing it instead, thereby putting Balm Garden in the sorceress's crosshairs, which is not something Norg will allow. Norg's solution to this looming threat? Confront us, kill us, and offer ours and Sid's head to the sorceress, who it turns out is also Sid's wife? Like the sorceress, Norg is not a hard fight if you understand his AI. The little chair thing he sits in will cast magic at you if the lights are red, so a quick use of Carbuncle will allow you to reflect his spells back at him, and force him to spend the next few turns dispelling your protections. While he's doing that, I make sure to draw the next GF from him, Leviathan, before pummeling him with magic, fists, and GFs until he dies like the little bitch he is. From there, we go to see the headmaster and demand some answers, and are given some time to reflect on what we've recently learned. Okay, we've danced around them for a bit, so let's talk about Guardian Forces. Guardian Forces were a new concept in Final Fantasy VIII, and 10-year-old me found them very interesting, even if I didn't fully understand them at the time. The idea is that there are beings and forces out in the world that you can do battle with, and if you best them in battle, you earn the right to command them as a summonable creature. In a way, they were kind of like Pokemon, which my 10-year-old brain could definitely understand, but they were so much cooler than Pokemon. Their abilities and attacks were way more visually impressive and destructive. In-game, Guardian Forces, or GFs as I've sometimes called them, are what give the character a majority of their abilities, as without a Guardian Force junction to them, in battle all a character can do is their basic attack and run from the battle. Not only that, but thanks to the junctioning system, GFs can be used to empower those that they are bound to, granting them additional abilities beyond even basic access to magic, such as elemental damage to their attacks, and the ability to turn enemy monsters into playing cards, the ability to steal additional items and money from monsters during combat, and the ability to refine items into magic or magic into items. There are 16 Guardian Forces that can be junctioned and summoned by the player, and 6 that cannot be junctioned and instead appear either randomly or are summoned using items. I can remember when I first got the strategy guide to the game and realized that I had missed several Guardian Forces. I of course immediately restarted the game and made it my mission to find them all, and even with the guide's help I almost missed a couple because the battles to get them are pretty difficult. Even after finding them, the game introduces some more complexity as each Guardian Force has a kind of compatibility rating with each potential playable character. The higher the ranking, the faster they are summoned and the more damage they do. But you can also artificially affect this ranking by the use of an item or just plain having the desired character repeatedly summon that specific Guardian Force in battle. It's an interesting idea that in the early game can be pretty important to pay attention to, but towards the mid and later game can be ignored in favor of just grinding the GF's favor with the use of items or battles. You've probably also noticed by now that when I summon a Guardian Force and it's going through its animation, the battle UI sometimes vanishes and a prompt to press the X button appears on screen. This is a power that some GFs have called Boost, which, as the name implies, allows the player to boost their attack damage. I'm not exactly sure how the mechanic works though. Am I boosting the damage by whatever number I'm at by the end of the animation, or is it a percentage of whatever number I'm at? Or maybe however far over 100 I get? I'm not sure. I could look it up online, but honestly it's kind of more fun to me just not to know how the mechanic works exactly. It brings me back to when I first played the game and I didn't know how it worked then either. In the early game on Disc 1, Guardian Forces definitely feel like a crutch for the player to lean on, and admittedly I did lean on them quite a bit. They're your heavy hitters, your powerhouse, your ace in the hole. Pretty much any time a monster more powerful than you pops up, you'll be calling these guys to deal out the majority of the damage to that monster. Some of their attacks can hit for thousands of damage points against the right monsters, whereas my basic and magic attacks might top out at 350 damage each. I also found myself using them as a kind of armor/second health bar, since while they are being summoned, any attack directed at you damages them instead. So if I was low on health, I'd start pulling them out a lot more so they could tank the damage while I had a chance to heal my character. The special abilities they bring to the table are pretty nice, but for Disc 1, they're mostly your damage dealers and supplemental health bars. But around the start of Disc 2, I started to notice a bit of a change in my use of the Guardian Forces system. Thanks to the draw system, and admittedly a lot of grinding on my part, I've amassed enough magic and unlocked enough junction abilities that junctioning was starting to have a major impact on my character and their stats, particularly the health, where I was able to push pretty much every party member past the 1500 range without much difficulty. Zell was also able to benefit from some junctions, increasing his strength to give his punches a lot more force behind them, in addition to their sleep-inducing status effects. By that time, I've also managed to get my hands on some pretty nifty spells which really expand the utility of my magic from just damage dealing and healing to instead being able to hasten my party so they can attack more often, slow enemies so they can attack less often, take massive chunks out of enemy health, revive fallen comrades, and remove any negative status effects they might have received. That last one being a true godsend in some fights. My GFs still function primarily as damage dealers, but they're no longer my sole option for dishing out the pain, so their secondary abilities start to play a greater role here, which is a welcome change. Overall, I like the Guardian Force system in Final Fantasy VIII. I think it's a fun concept, and I like watching the animations that play when they're summoned. Plus, they have some interesting plot significance later on, but that's getting a little ahead of ourselves. This part of the game also starts to focus a little bit more on Squall and his state of mind, so let's go ahead and talk about that for a moment. Up until recently, Squall was under the impression that being a seed meant following orders, knowing how to defend and take care of yourself, and solving other people's problems without having to worry about them becoming your problems. Safe to say, those old ideas no longer apply to the new reality that he is facing. Throughout the last several missions, Squall has found himself forced to make decisions for his would-be employer, in order to see that the employer's overall mission succeeds. Not only that, he's now also come face to face with the consequences of those choices, mainly that he not only put Balm Garden and everyone in it at risk of being killed, but that he himself was nearly killed and was subsequently captured and tortured for information that he didn't have and didn't even know existed because it was kept secret from him. He's had to assume up until this point that Seeds were just elite mercenaries for hire. Yet, as Sid recently explained, Seed's true purpose is to act as a military force capable of battling and slaying a sorceress should one ever turn evil, like what's happening right now. And then we're greeted with another flashback, but not one of Laguna, Kyros, or Ward. Instead, we're shown a scene of a young boy, standing alone in some old ruin, talking to himself and promising his sister that he'll be strong enough, that he'll be okay and will take care of himself while she is gone. But the flashback fades, and once again we find Rinoa in our room asking for us to spend time with her. "Lady, can't you go bother Zell for a bit? You're interrupting my brooding." A little while later, during our not a walking date, we're alerted to the presence of a ship approaching us. The ship and its crew turn out to be Seeds from another garden, and are looking for Elone, the once little girl from Laguna's flashbacks, who's now a fully grown woman and here at our garden. We find her in the library, and when we see her, we immediately confront her about our visions of Laguna and demand to know what is going on. She drops some vague answers and tells us we're her only hope before being led away by the Seeds, who promise to keep her safe. And with that, we're back to being adrift. Until a day or so later when we end up crashing into a small fishing village in the middle of the ocean. All things considered, they're pretty nice about it. They offer us technicians to help us repair our floating school and then kindly ask that we leave as soon as possible, rightly so assuming that the Galbadane military will be looking for us. And sure enough, as we leave the mayor's home, the Galbad military shows up and starts causing trouble. Okay, so if I'm honest, I think this next battle is kind of pointless and stupid. So after we drive off this Galbad soldier, he calls in one of those tank things that we fought back at the missile base. And like at the missile base, I use Guardian Forces to beat the thing back, but after it falls into the sea, it turns out our missing friends were the ones who were piloting it, so our own friends were fighting us, and we can potentially die during this fight. Also, we're not really given an explanation as to how they survived the base exploding, or how they survived unseen for several days inside this tank thing. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad to see them again, but did we really have to go through this whole battle sequence? Returning to the garden, we give Sid our report, and he decides to make us leader of Seed forces because we're destined to fight the sorceress. Rightly so, Squall has a bit of a well-deserved freak-out, again flashing back to the lonely boy while in his room, trying to make sense of everything that has happened in the last few days. Okay, so I'll admit this next part here really isn't my favorite part. In fact, I find it kind of tedious and, if I'm honest, probably my least favorite part in the entire game. So after Squall's promotion, the rest of the party meet up and decide they should do something to help everyone in the garden relax, but also to celebrate Squall's, promotion. We spend some time having the different party members play and then select some musical instruments for a small concert they want to put on for everyone to help everyone kind of cheer up. This part is actually kind of fun, as you have complete control over who plays what instrument. In my case, the song they did kind of ended up sounding like an Irish jig, which I particularly enjoyed. What I enjoy less is the side plot that's going on between Squall and Renoa simultaneously. Renoa was waiting for me outside my room, again, and after a bit of cajoling brings me to the concert and tries to get me to open up to her about how I'm feeling. And while it does work at first, she keeps pushing Squall to open up more and more, and it ends with us having a small fight and leaving her standing alone. Later, once the garden is fixed, we discuss with Sid and some other top-ranking students what our next move should be, and Quizits suggests heading back to Balam to make sure everyone is okay, what with our garden flying over them and all. Cue the montage of me figuring out the garden's controls, but once I get the hang of it, we head for Balam, and when we arrive, find it under lockdown from the Galbad army. There's a pretty tedious sequence here where we have to find the Galbad captain so we can have permission to speak to the commander, and it turns out that both the captain and the commander are Sephir's old school lackeys, Raijin and Fujin, who upon seeing us attack. This fight is not easy. Raijin deals a lot of physical damage, making the use of the protect spell almost mandatory if you want to keep your party members alive. And I made the mistake of using some lightning magic on him at one point, which healed him for some of the damage that I had just caused him. In the next phase of the battle, I remembered to draw the next Guardian Force, Pandemonia, out of Fujin, but then waste no time beating both of them to a pulp. After the battle, we confront the two of them about what they're doing, and they admit that while they don't really want to fight us or their former friends from Balm Garden, they can't just abandon Sephir either, otherwise he wouldn't have anyone who actually cares about him. We allow them to escape and return to the garden to inform Sid of what's happening. Afterward, Selphie pops in and asks if we could go to Tribad Gardens to check out the damage the missiles did. When we get there, the place is pretty messed up. It's not completely rubble, but certainly damaged beyond repair. But it seems like there are a few survivors, so while Selphie talks with them, our group waits by what's left of the basketball courts and discusses their plans. And it's here, in the rubble of the bombed-out former garden, that the game drops what it thinks is an emotionally charged bombshell. That everyone gathered here, minus Renoa, actually grew up as children together at an orphanage that was run by the sorceress Edea when she was still a mortal woman. Okay, just what? And second of all, why? Like, okay, up until this point, the story's been doing a decent job of making me like these characters and be invested in their stories. Yeah, there's been some parts that kind of annoy me, but for the most part, everything was good. And now this, just why? Making everyone having grown up at the same orphanage doesn't really add anything to the story. It doesn't deepen these characters or change how I view them in any way. The only reason I can see them including it was so that they could introduce the concepts that the frequent use of Guardian Forces in this setting causes those using the Guardian Forces to suffer from memory loss. And the concept of memory loss, I'll be honest, I don't mind. I like the idea of having to give something up of yourself when you use these primal otherworldly beings in order to gain their aid in battle. That's a neat idea to me, and it does introduce some lore building to this world. Making us all having grown up from the same orphanage does not. And while we're on the subject, making Edea our mother figure, again, I get what they're going for, trying to give the decision to hunt her down and kill her have more weight to it. It's no longer something that we're just doing because we have to, but now it's got this emotional depth because these orphans are banding together to kill the only mother they've ever known, except that it's stupid. It comes completely out of left field. There's no build-up or foreshadowing anywhere in the game about this prior to this moment. It's just melodrama for the sake of the game trying to make the audience feel something more than they already do. I think probably the reason why I take such issue with this is that they overstep its use, making all of the party members former orphans. I think if it had been limited to just Squall and Zephyr, that might have been more interesting. Perhaps they could even use it to explain Squall's constant need to push people away. Maybe he wasn't very close to Edea when she was his caretaker, constantly getting into arguments or fighting with the other kids and her because he just wanted to be left alone. Meanwhile, Sephir was always the golden child who was always trying to be Edea's favorite, but just couldn't manage it because Edea didn't choose favorites. I don't know, that's just an idea I came up with after like 5 minutes of thinking. But you see what I mean? Even that 5-minute-old idea has more possibilities than making everyone a former orphan. The only character this changes in any way is Renoa, and the only way it makes her special is by excluding her. Like I said before, this is probably the biggest issue I take with this game. But hey, we're now like 12 hours into this game and I haven't really had anything major to complain about, so overall I'd say things are still going great. After these revelations, we're given a chance to go off and do our own thing for a while being given the vague objective to also search for the old orphanage from our flashbacks, to hopefully find some clues as to what Adia's plans are, or at the very least why she's doing what she's doing. And it's here that I spend a little more time grinding, fine-tuning my magic collection, refining some items, and in general explore the now open world that's available to me. After about 10 minutes of this, we get pulled into a cutscene where our helmsman hands us a pair of what has to be the blurriest binoculars in history and tells us to look at this. Turns out, our garden isn't the only one that can be converted to a mobile base. Galbad's garden can do the same trick and is now on a direct path with us, with Zephyr leading the charge. I'll be honest, this sequence is one of my favorites in the game, as we issue orders to the students and seed forces at our disposal to ready themselves for battle, protect the lower classmates, and shore up our defenses before we head down to take our place amongst our troops and defend our home. We get a nice scene of Zell rallying some troops, and then an unnecessary moment of him randomly asking to borrow a ring that our character has apparently been wearing this whole time. Seriously, Zell, now is not the time. The battle for Balm Garden is pretty cool, a wonderful blend of cutscene, live gameplay, over background visuals, and combat. Galbad has some pretty cool troops at their disposal, including these jet bikers and some flying units in mechanical suits, which quickly overwhelm our forces even as we do our best to fight them off. If I'm being completely honest, this one part of the game I wish could be punched up with modern technology. Some of the background scenes and shots from the cutscenes are absolutely amazing, doing a great job of really selling the idea that this is an all-out assault on our garden, with the students doing their best to repel the invasion. But when it comes time for us to actually run around, it's just the same hallways we've always seen, but with some student sprites running around and the occasional random encounter with a monster or group of Galbad soldiers. It's still a fun sequence, mind you, but I can't help but imagine it with modern graphics and rendering techniques, really selling us on the idea of the entire school being under attack, enemy soldiers in every hallway, monsters running wild, and the like. During all this, there's a bit of a side plot where Renoa fell off the side of the garden during the start of the battle, and so we're trying to find a way to save her while also trying to manage our troops in the battle. Then, when we do the leader thing and try to focus on the battle at hand rather than save her, all of our friends get mad at us. Come on guys, I'm not the only one who could be working to save her. Hell, Quizit's and Selfie's weapons are basically a rope and chain. Why can't the two of you work together to haul Renoa off the cliffside she's clinging to? But no, it has to be us, which is made even harder by the fact that Galbadane forces are kind of kicking our ass at the moment. After all, they're a professional military force, and we're basically a bunch of college kids, only some of whom have passed the seed test, while most of the others are still in training. So in a moment of desperation, we decide to take the fight to them. After all, attacking is a hell of a lot easier than defending, and it might buy our forces some time to try and recover. We get on the school PDA and give a rough but passable speech that inspires the remaining students to keep fighting before we head down to lead the assault, only to get sidetracked on our way by one of the flying soldiers who knocks us into an emergency door before getting into a fist fight with us while we dangle above the gardens as they collide and crash into each other. As a kid, I remember this scene being really tense as I tried to time my punches and kicks while working to block the punches and kicks thrown by the Galbad soldier. This time though, I just spam the fucker, wailing on him with fist and knee until he lets go and plummets to his death, before using the flying suit to finally go save Renoa, who is still hanging to the cliffside where we left her. And can I just say, if she can manage to hang on after all the ramming and crashing and shaking that our garden is going through, then I feel like she probably should have been able to climb up the wall and save herself. Landing on Galbad Gardens, we make a run for the interior of the garden and link up with our friends who lead the charge here and are waiting for us inside. We're also given a scene where Renoa annoyingly flirts with us, saying she asked Zell to get Squall's ring so she could have him make a copy of it for her, and how she feels so happy, and alright lady, can we talk? My home is under attack. Students are fighting and dying all around us. I nearly died saving your ass. Now is not the fucking time to flirt with me and play cute. Also, who gave you permission to copy my ring? You seem to have decided that you're gonna be my girlfriend, and honestly, nothing in the story has happened to make me, the player, feel even remotely attracted to you. I'll admit that I personally enjoy romance in video games, especially BioWare games, where it's gone from quirky side quests to back-of-the-box expected feature. Garrus and Tali from Mass Effect, along with Dorian and Cassandra from Dragon Age, are some of my favorite romances of all time. But Lord Almighty, Rinoa is not the type of girl I go for. She's annoying, doesn't know what she wants, but is perfectly happy to boss Squall and company around and tell him that he needs to change and open up to others, and then get all pouty when we don't do as she says. Well, I say she needs to change and not be so demanding. Stop trying to fix me and just accept the friend zone that you're gonna be in. Honestly, I'd rather date Selphie or Zell or even Irving. Hell, even the Sorceress, pretty much anyone else. Unfortunately, we have to have her in our party for this next bit, but with Zell in our party, we do alright, as we solve a few door puzzles before confronting a wild GF named Cerberus that's gotten loose during the battle. I actually get my ass completely handed to me the first time we fight him. He whoops me so hard it's basically unfair, using his special ability to give himself triple magic before casting silence and sleep on my entire party and then picking us off at his leisure. The second time I was prepared and managed to beat him thanks to Zell's limit break ability by putting the smackdown on him. Something I absolutely love about replaying this game is getting to see all the old visuals and graphics. I've gotten so used to high definition graphics and textures that it's kinda neat to look back and see the old ways of doing things, back when polygon counts were in the low hundreds and not the high thousands. And it's cool to me how developers built what is clearly a pretty barren world and then spruced it up with clever camera angles, scene transitions, and background imagery. Scenes of me just running around the towns and cities are beautiful to look at, and I find it really neat when there's something active on the screen that moves or interacts with the world in some way. I believe it was Resident Evil who pioneered this method of world design, essentially using point of view and other background design techniques to give the illusion of a wider world, while only actively rendering things the player can interact with. And even then, not everything the player can interact with is obvious, with there being several occasional hidden items or secret buttons that aren't out in plain sight for the player to see. I'm really fascinated with scenes that blend animation and gameplay together. I like this scene at the Dalek communication dish or the Galbadane train. It amazes me that what I am watching is basically a cutscene, and yet my character model is still able to move around. Now I know realistically this is because the backgrounds are essentially a set of clear blocks on which a movie is being projected, but I still can't help but be tickled by it. Growing up in the late 90s and early 2000s, I was so used to characters always looking a specific way in a cutscene. No matter how I made them look in the moment-to-moment gameplay, they always return to that default skin in cutscenes and cinematics. Even some modern games still do this, while other games, like my previously reviewed Saints Row, make a point to render your character as you have customized them for every cutscene. And yet, I don't think I've played another game where I can actively move my character around during a cutscene, even in modern games, at least not on purpose. And while yes, it can somewhat diminish the drama of the moment, I can't help but wonder why this is something that other games haven't dabbled or experimented with. After all that, it's a quick jog up some stairs, and then it's time to face Sepher and the Sorceress. Sepher is an easy battle, honestly. Thanks to Carbuncle, any magic he uses reflects back at him, and with no way to dispel the reflect, he's left hurting himself anytime he tries to use magic on me, leaving me free to wail on him with fists and guardian forces. He does at one point bust out some special move called Demon's Blade, which looks kinda ridiculous, but overall he's no match for me and my party. After beating him, the Sorceress calls him a fool and tries to make a run for it by sinking into the floor and to the room below us. Yet somehow we still manage to beat her and watch as she crashes through the ceiling in a dramatic fashion. Sepher again comes to her aid, and honestly I'm getting kinda tired of his punk ass. 1 or 2 GF blasts later and he's dead. Good. And I can finally turn my attention towards the Sorceress. This fight isn't super hard either. Honestly, I was kinda surprised at how simple it was. Now, she did pull a sneaky move by somehow using magic that is able to bypass my reflect spell. Again, probably some special condition built into her AI since she doesn't seem to have any physical attacks, but all it really takes is like 2 hits from Diablo and maybe a blast from Shiva, and she hits the floor, before releasing some strange blast of light which freezes all of us, but compels Rinoa to approach Sepher's lifeless body. Another flash of light, and suddenly he's up and walking around again, while Rinoa is on the ground and we're all still frozen. A fade to black ensues, and when we fade back in, we're in the Balm Infirmary, standing over Rinoa, who has slipped into some kind of magical coma since this attack. And it is here, on this cliffhanger, that Disc 2 ends. This is usually where I talk about how I would fix the game or what I would change to make the game better, but since we're only halfway through the actual game, I'm going to hold off on doing that for now, since some of my current issues can possibly be resolved in the second half of the game. Plus, if you've been paying attention, I'm sure you can already guess what I'd change by now. Disc 1 and 2 of Final Fantasy VIII honestly feels like Season 1 of an anime to me. We've met our characters, gotten to know them a bit, seen them tested and passed those tests before being sent out into the wider world, and now they are starting to see the consequences of their actions appear in the setting. At times, they can be frustrating and cliche, but at other times I find myself enthusiastically hooked in the best possible way, and I have several questions going forward into Disc 3. What exactly is the sorceress planning? What was that flashback with the boy alone in the ruins? Why are Squall and the party members having dreams and visions of Laguna and his friends? Just what will happen now that the garden is mobile and on the run? Yes, the writing and characters might be dated and cliched. Yes, the graphics are several generations old. And yes, the combat system is positively ancient. But honestly, as I play this game, none of that really matters to me. This game has a freshness and a sense of fun and whimsy to it that I don't think many games have nowadays. It was made in a time when story and characters and plot were more important to a game than the bottom line and sales projections. Coming off the heel of the juggernaut that was Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VIII feels like the devs wanted to give the players a story that was similar but somehow different in almost every way. And so far, I cannot help but feel like they're succeeding. Even when they stumble, I find myself appreciating the effort they put into their attempt. Squall, for all his flaws, is a relatable character to me, because I too struggle with confidence in knowing what is the right thing to do in some situations. Even when I know what the right thing to do is, doing it can be just as, if not harder at times, when the situation is something I feel is not my responsibility to deal with. The setting may be Japanese fantasy futurism, but I think almost anyone can find at least one trait or aspect of the main 6 characters that they'll identify with or connect to. None of them are perfect, and none of them pretend to be, and that to me is a nice change of pace. In an industry that has gotten so obsessed with making the player feel like a badass hero at all times, it's so nice to have a hero who is flawed and has fears and concerns separate from the players. So for now, we're going to end on this cliffhanger, with Rinoa in a coma and Squall and company unsure of what to do or if there is anything that they can do. I want to say a big thank you to everyone who clicked on this video, and a bigger thank you to those of you that stuck around with me for the entire video. If you enjoy my work, please feel free to leave a comment, a like, or a subscribe. Thanks for watching. Bye.